Hi, I'm Naci Konar-Steenberg, and for this year's science fair, I did research on the relationship between personality tests and changes in identity. So personality tests and investigation of the identity with them, it's the bedrock of the field of cognitive psychology, in terms of investigating how people view themselves. However, personality tests are notoriously unreliable. So my project is called Significant Zero, the effect of personality questionnaires on identity-relevant choices. And I was trying to investigate if taking a personality test would have any effect on people's identity. Okay, so recent developments in cognitive psychology have looked at how people have different aspects of their identity salient at different times. A salient identity is an identity that's present in a certain situation that a person would not normally have expressed. So let's look right here at the conceptual model of the identity that I have displayed right here. Now, I want to be clear, this is not something I'm going to try to prove with my paper. This is simply a tool to help us conceptualize what I'm talking about. So, choices someone makes are tied to their identity, or more specifically, as I explained before, someone's currently salient identity. And the choices they make are usually made in order to achieve some sort of goal, in self-regulation, that's what that term means. And gradually people learn from experience, and if you're in an entirely new situation, you're definitely going to learn from that experience and integrate it into your identity. In the moment, temporally, someone's salient identity influences the choices they make in a sort of feedback loop. Again, I'm not trying to prove that, but that's a tool to help us conceptualize what I'm talking about. Switching tacks for a moment, the problem with personality tests is that people change their responses, often in line with how they would like to be, instead of how they actually are. So that sounds a lot like people changing their identity momentarily, like I just talked about. Now here's the thing. Research has shown people can change their identity momentarily due to some form of prompting or social stimulus. And I have a citation to that in my works cited page at the end. If we combine those 2 points, we have something interesting to study. Wouldn't the situation of a personality test function as that form of social stimulus? So we're interested in changing identity in a certain social situation. And we don't know how people's actual identity is transformed into a personality test result. So those are 2 gaps in knowledge, and I'm trying to combine them. So the questions we're testing are, do people make choices differently after taking a personality test? And is the reverse true? Do people who have made choices answer a personality test differently in the moment? So let's find out. So here are my 2 hypotheses. After taking a personality test, respondents will alter their decisions on identity-related choices significantly, and its inverse. After answering questions about identity-related choices, respondents will alter their decisions on personality tests significantly. So, in order to test these hypotheses, I made 2 questionnaires and compiled them into 4 surveys and sent them to people to be completed online. The first test was a personality test I made using the International Personality Item Pool, is what it's called, which is a collection of statements relating to the Big five-factor model of identity. And the second survey was what I called the Media Choices Test. It was 6 questions about which type of media someone would prefer between 2 movies, and then 6 questions about news sources. These 12 questions were separated into 3 blocks, roughly conforming to 1 stereotyped identity. The reason for this was that if people identified with one over another, we would be able to see stronger variation from the mean, and I'm going to explain later why that's important. So I combined these into 4 surveys. The Media Choices Test only, which is just taking the Media Choices Test. The Personality Test only, which is just taking the Personality Test. Those 2 were my control groups. And then to test Hypothesis 1, as you can see here, I made a survey that was the Personality Test and then the Media Choices Test. So the Media Choices Test, I was hoping I'd see some sort of statistically measurable effect in. And then to measure hypothesis 2, I had the media choices test followed up by the personality test. And over Amazon Mechanical Turk, I sent these out to people to get responses. I had 737 responses total, but I removed 125 of them because 124 simply did not trust the news sources that I had listed in the media choices test, and one respondent simply did not answer any of the questions. So I had 612 total responses that I accepted and analyzed. And then I analyzed these in terms of how much variation from the mean there was in terms of, for instance, how much a respondent might say that they had openness in their identity or conscientiousness. So this is, as to my knowledge, a novel way of analyzing personality test data. So why does this work? Because it shows that someone in the experimental group is more confident about their identity established during the first test. Previous studies have shown personality tests and actual identity are not entirely similar, so together this amounts to the priming of an identity in someone. There are downsides to this, as I'm going to discuss. Experimentally, it does not mean, however, that we need to make sure that the respondent's identity is affected in a certain way, just that it is affected. So, here are my results. For the media choices test, I saw significant increases in variation in the experimental group versus the control group, specifically in block 3, which had a p-value from my f-test of 0.0114. Using Fisher's method, I combined results from all 3 blocks to get a p-value of 0.0067, which would be significant under a p-value of less than 0.05. For the personality test, I had mostly insignificant results, except for one factor, openness, which had very nearly significant results, specifically 0.0528 for its p-value. I verified these results in terms of looking at whether the data was normal or not. That's a requirement for the f-test. So I figured out whether it was normal. It was. And I also compared the constituent sample of my experimental group to the personality trait makeup of my control group to make sure that the same kind of people were taking the experimental, the test in the experimental group as opposed to the control group. That was the case. I analyzed that using a 2-factor t-test, and I analyzed normality with a Shapiro-Wilks test. Furthermore, f-testing is very, very sensitive to non-normality, so I used Levine's test to verify my results. So we can conclude, probably, that there is significant change in people's identity after taking a personality test, but not after making choices specifically about preferred media. So we accept hypothesis 1 and reject hypothesis 2, as you can see here. But there are several caveats we should talk about. For instance, reinforcement versus establishment. We are assuming that this experimental design works, but we rely on previous data and experiments to confirm this hypothesis, because previous data postulated that people's identity actually changes in response to answering a personality test. My experiment made sure that that change persisted over making choices afterward. So we can assume that this experiment works. However, a more robust test would be nice. Specifically, I'd recommend looking at legitimate choices done in person rather than a questionnaire over the internet. There was a bug that was that made it so it was difficult for people to fill out the form. I did my best to remove data tainted by the bug. So why is this useful? Well, it's useful for, let's revisit the identity diagram up here. It's useful for filling in some of the blanks here that we don't know about, and gaining a more complete view of cognitive psychology. It will also be useful for developing better personality tests, and simply better experimental design. Here are my works cited, and thank you for watching.